You want to talk about a headline over the weekend that was frankly shocking and incredibly surprising, and all of those superlatives and adjectives, everything that you can think of. Cam Ward, after releasing a video in which he said he was going to enter the NFL draft, not signing an agent, but that he was going to enter the draft and presumably go pro. He then reversed course over the weekend, decided he was going to sign with the Miami Hurricanes and will be their quarterback in 2024. Should be very, very fascinating. And I think Miami was in a spot where they absolutely needed a player like Cam Ward to sort of boost things for them in 2024. They had done a really good job in recruiting, but they hadn't really gotten the splash player that would put them over the top in the ACC. And I think with Cam Ward, you get a player that's dynamic, that's thrown for 3,000 yards the past 2 seasons at Washington State, was also a stud at Incarnate Word before he went to Washington State. And he's the sort of dynamic athlete that will level up your offense pretty much no matter what. And he happens to land in a scenario at Miami where he does have some pieces around him that are going to allow him to level up the offense there in Miami. They've got good offensive linemen. They've recruited the offensive and defensive line really well. But they also have returning their 2 best receivers from last year, Xavier Restrepo, who had 1,000 yards, and Jacoby George, who had 800 plus himself. So you got 2 good receivers. You've got Mark Fletcher, can't remember his name, coming back at running back. And then Cam Ward just gets to come in here and cook for Miami, which Miami should be in a spot where now they have kind of gotten a good baseline, a good bedrock foundation underneath them in recruiting. They've got the top 5 class coming in from the high school class. Things are moving in the right direction. He's the cherry on top, if you will, for Mario Cristobal, and perhaps the added element that's going to push them over the top, that's going to get them into an ACC championship sort of conversation. You're going to have to deal with Clemson. You're going to have to deal with Florida State. They're not going away. I think you're going to have to also deal with NC State for that ACC championship next season. But I think this addition with Cam Ward easily puts them in comfortably in that top 4, in that spot where you feel like, okay, if a couple things break right for them next year, they could be playing one of those other 3 teams in the ACC championship next season. I think, too, the thing that with Cam Ward that is going to be, I mean, people are talking about it already. He's very mobile. He is the sort of player that makes your wrongs right, if that makes sense. Bad play calling, Cam Ward can make it look good. He's got a crazy arm, and he could very well play himself into being a first-round pick next season in the NFL. But I think more importantly than that, he's just going to steady some things. Where Tyler Van Dyke was struggling was just avoiding the bad, the real bad. And I think Cam Ward for them is going to just elevate what they've been doing over there in Miami. Kalen DeBoer officially was hired as the head coach for Alabama over the weekend. Jedd then stepped in and took over at Washington, which is it's a can of worms in and of itself. But Kalen DeBoer coming in as Alabama's next coach is fascinating on so many levels, because on the face, you've got to follow up the GOAT. I mean, the greatest coach of all time in Nick Saban. And I think depending on how you grade success for Alabama, I don't know that there's a scenario which Kalen DeBoer can be successful, because the nut jobs down there in Tuscaloosa are going to say, if you don't win 2 national championships here as the coach, it was a failure. And I don't know that we should just expect out of the gate Kalen DeBoer to go win a national championship. I know he took Washington to the championship game, and he's going to inherit a stable of talent there in Alabama. But it's not just on its face value that this is a team that immediately goes into the playoff and becomes a perennial championship contender. I mean, he's not going to change what Nick Saban was doing, which is, I think, where it gets weird is normally in these sorts of press conferences, when you introduce a new coach, there's something that went wrong that the coach has to fix. And in Kalen DeBoer's case, there's nothing to fix. If anything, he's the guy that will have to fix what he does to maybe fit what Nick Saban was doing, because Nick Saban, was he ever going to do anything wrong? No. I mean, he won 6 national championships. Like, every single thing that Nick Saban did, regardless if it was right or wrong, is considered right because he made everything right for Alabama. So Kalen DeBoer, he can't change who he is to fit the Nick Saban-sized mold that he's stepping into. But what he's got to do is he's got to mold what he does to sort of fit this Alabama program, and I think that is going to be extremely difficult. I think the on-field success part of this is extremely key, but I think the off-field expectations are probably even more key to how successful Kalen DeBoer is as a coach there at Alabama. I think, too, you've also got to look at recruiting, and I know that's the knock that people have brought up for Kalen DeBoer, is that he was not an elite recruiter, and he also hasn't recruited the South. So when you're expecting the next Alabama coach, you're expecting one of those guys that has recruited in that footprint before, that has those relationships with high schools, that he can just tap back into and immediately, get the ball rolling a little bit. And that's why Dan Lanning jumped out, why Mike Norvell, Steve Sarkisian immediately jumped out in the hiring process, is because they had recruited that high school footprint. And even more than that, they had the ties to Alabama that Kalen DeBoer didn't have. But, the other, like, he won everywhere. So it's so interesting because the dude never lost. I mean, he's 104-12 in his career as a head coach, which is absolutely insane. And in his 2 years at Washington, it was 25-3. Like, the dude wins. But at the same time, while he was at Washington, his first recruiting class ranked 26th overall, and the 2024 class currently ranks 41st for Washington. So, like, you can't go in there to Alabama and recruit the 12th ranked class in the country. Like, that's just not going to fly. You have to recruit top 5 classes every single year. Frankly, you have to recruit top 3 classes every single year for people to take you seriously. But at the same time, you've got this guy that has won everywhere, absolutely everywhere. It doesn't matter whether he was coaching at Sioux Falls in the NAIA, if he was the offensive coordinator at Indiana, where he elevated that program, goes to Fresno State, starts winning games there, and then goes to Washington and wins there as well. He's got the pedigree in order to be successful, and he is a really good coach. But how's he going to fit in this Alabama program? And I think that's where it's interesting. It's not that, is he a good enough coach to be successful at Alabama? Because I don't think quality of coach has anything to do with it. I think expectations have everything to do with it. And if everybody expects, now that Nick Saban is gone, for things just to continue as they were for the past 15 years, you can't expect that. Only Nick Saban, maybe even Kirby Smart. You might be able to throw Kirby Smart in that bubble there, but it is a very small bubble and a very select few individuals that fit in that can just get things rolling the way Saban had for the past 15 years. So it'll be really interesting to see how DeBoer works out as Alabama's next coach. And I think, on its face, you say, okay, it's a good hire, he's a good coach. But I think at the end of the day, being a good coach has frankly nothing to do with how successful he will be as Alabama's coach. So very interesting situation, especially too when he took Washington to the title game. Typically you just don't leave programs after you take them to a title game. You just keep building. And I don't know. I guess for him, he thought it was the job of a lifetime, and he's not wrong. Alabama is the job of a lifetime. His successor at Washington is going to be Jedd Fisch, and where you get like a tiny inkling of, little odd with Kalen DeBoer, but you get it because he's going to Alabama. Jedd Fisch has weird vibes up and down this thing. He led Arizona to a 10-3 season this past year. The surprise of the season, in fact, was Arizona quarterback Noah Fifita, who was a freshman. So the scenario was you have this heralded recruit, Jayden de Laura, being your quarterback there at Arizona, and you're pinning all your hopes on him. But then he gets hurt, and this kid, Noah Fifita, comes in and just lights the world on fire. And you win a bunch of games, finish the season 10-3, smack Oklahoma in your bowl game. And, the sky's the limit now for Jedd Fisch. It's like, oh, okay, Arizona on everybody's list for top 10 teams next season. They are in there somewhere, top 15 at the very least. So he had Arizona rolling, and then the Washington gig opens up, and he bolts, goes to Washington. And it's so weird because last week on his radio show, he's asked point blank, like, are you going to leave? Because he hadn't signed his deal yet. Apparently there was an extension on the board, and he hadn't signed it. And so rightfully, the radio guy says, there's reports that you're interested in some other jobs. Like, what's the deal? What are you going to do? And he's like, I'm staying. We've got 18 of 22 starters or whatever it was coming back. Like, Arizona's ready to rock and roll. They've got everything right in front of them. They're moving to the Big 12. Very good chance they could win the new Big 12 next season. And then if you want to jump to like Florida, if that job opens up and they fire Billy Napier, you've got the red carpet rolled out for you if you're Jedd Fisch to go take the Florida job if you want the job upgrade. But instead of sticking with this program that he's turned around in Arizona, he pounces on the Washington job when it comes open. And yes, there's definitely a pay raise involved here, but like, it's just weird because Washington, after making this national title run, like I just mentioned earlier, they have not recruited to the level that you would want as an elite program. You haven't even hit a top 25 recruiting class the past 2 seasons. So the talent deficit there is going to be huge. And I think everybody with a brain looks at next season and says Arizona is going to be a lot better of a football team than Washington when Washington's moving to the Big Ten. So not only do you have to play Oregon in your conference and USC with Lincoln Riley over there, because Lincoln Riley's going to have something up his sleeve, but not only that, now you have to deal with Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, Iowa. Wisconsin could get things figured out. Nebraska just got Dylan Raiola. So like, there's all these reasons to think that Washington, after going to a national championship, could regress in a massive way and maybe be like an 8-4 team with the talent they've got on board. And not only that, the talent that was there, for example, Will Rogers, transfer quarterback who transferred in from Mississippi State, was on the sideline for Washington in the national championship game. When DeBoer leaves, Will Rogers jumps right back into the portal, and you lose him. And so with Jedd Fisch, you're downgrading your prospects if you want to jump to Florida, where he was a graduate assistant in the aughts, 2000 aughts. It's just a weird situation. Very, very weird. I don't know why you would jump from Arizona to Washington. I really don't. It doesn't make any sense. I know he gets a pay bump, and maybe that's part of it. Maybe he just wanted to get paid. But like, you're making $5.5 million at Arizona. Like, let's be real here. That's enough money. Especially when everybody and their brother knows that this dude is angling for an upgrade Power 5 job. Like, just stay where you are, win a bunch of games in 2024 for Arizona, and then if you want to go get another Power 5 job, a la Florida, because all the signs point to Billy Napier is going to be gone, go take that job, get your pay bump there, and do it at Florida, where you can recruit, and there's the history of success there that you can kind of fall back on. Just such a weird situation there with Jedd Fisch. I don't understand it, but maybe he knows more than I do. Maybe he is plugged in or something. I don't know. Caleb Williams, he declared for the NFL draft. in a move that surprised absolutely nobody. He's now set to be the number 1 prospect in the draft. And it's a very interesting situation with the Chicago Bears holding that first overall pick, because obviously they've got Justin Fields at quarterback. And Fields, he has not gotten it done. It's so funny. If you go on Twitter and you just look at Bears fans' Twitter, I guess, everybody and their brother is just obsessed with Justin Fields. It's like, if we build around Justin Fields, if we get him this, if we do that, he's going to be great. And yes, on paper, that makes sense. Building around Justin Fields does make a lot of sense, especially when you've got the number 1 overall pick. You could trade that pick for 3 first-round picks, at the minimum 2 first-round picks plus something else. And then use that draft capital to build around Justin Fields. On top of that first pick, they've also got the 9th pick in the draft as well. So there's a lot of reasons for optimism and a lot of cap space there for the Bears, where you could think, okay, if they play the cards right, this could be a ridiculous roster outside of Justin Fields in a year, in 2 years. If you just stick with Fields, he could potentially get you to where you want to go, get you to Super Bowl contention. He's obviously talented. The issue with Justin Fields is that he hasn't produced in a way that would make you think, oh yeah, this is the franchise guy. Now Caleb Williams comes in and he's critiqued, he's maligned, but I think the thing that everybody will agree on is that he is freakishly talented. And he has the ability to do things that nobody else in this draft can do. Frankly, he can do things that the only other human that you would expect to do these things is Patrick Mahomes. So the talent is just off the charts. I guess with Caleb Williams, there's a couple things to be wary of taking him at number 1. I guess 1, you've already got Fields, who could have a really high ceiling, who could end up being a great player. We don't know yet, though. Or, the offense hasn't been good. They just fired Luke Getsy. And if you draft Caleb Williams, you can't trade that pick and acquire more picks as well. And 2, Caleb Williams sort of has this thing where he goes off script and sort of improvises at times, even when improvising is not the correct move, if you will. But he does do things that it's like, that is ridiculous. Nobody else can do that. He flicks his wrist and the ball goes 60 yards and you're like, oh my God. And it's off platform. He does stuff where it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. The way that he sort of scrambles around the pocket and makes something out of nothing is foolish. But I think also where he's going to struggle at the next level is that he does all these things, and instead of taking the 4-yard check down, he tries to make a 40-yard play. And in a lot of ways, it is what Patrick Mahomes struggled with when he first came into the NFL, and things that he had to learn sitting that first year behind Alex Smith was, hey, you don't have to get 50 yards every single play. Sometimes it's better just to take the check down and let your guy keep you on, keep the chains moving, if you will, keep you humming, keep your offense in rhythm, instead of, every other drive we get a 50-yard bomb that's ridiculous, but all the other plays, we're going 3 and out. So I think with Caleb Williams, he's a freak. He's going to be a really good pro. I think he's going to be a really good pro. Is he right for the Bears? I don't know. The Bears have a really difficult decision to make. It's going to be one that I think if you had to put a gun to my head and you said, what are they going to do? I would say they're going to draft Caleb Williams. They're going to trade Justin Fields. Maybe they think they can get a first-round pick for Fields. I think if you can do that, that's probably a great move. And then you have 3 first-round picks. You've got future capital as well, still with the Carolina Panthers trade for Bryce Young. You've got a lot of options here, a lot of cap room. You can still build around Caleb Williams. I think even, Even if you take Caleb Williams at 1, take Roma Dunze or Troy Franklin or somebody like that at 9, or maybe even draft an offensive tackle to help out there as well. You've got some options there. They're just going to need to hit on the play caller, hire whoever that ends up being. And, we'll see how that shakes out. The Eagles. This was a travesty of all travesties. The Philadelphia Eagles lost 32-9, I think was the final score, is what it ended up being, against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the wildcard round of the playoffs. It's so wild to think that at one point this season, the Philadelphia Eagles were 10-1. They were considered the best team in the NFL. They were, there were a few hiccups, but they were rolling. And then they've gone 1-6 in their next 7 games. They lose in the first round of the playoffs to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and they make Baker Mayfield look like an MVP while doing it. I think Baker Mayfield threw for 330 yards and 3 touchdowns. It's not going to get it done. The things that I noticed in watching that game were that the Eagles' offensive game plan was horrific. And it's been the same game plan all year long. And they just have happened to have A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith and Dallas Goedert to sort of cover up some of these boo-boos that are being created with their play calls. They run everything out of shotgun except the tush push. They run, their run game consists entirely of inside zone and tush push. That is, if you boil it down to what they do the most, it is legitimately just inside zone from shotgun and tush push when they're within a yard or 2 yards. You just can't have any sort of run game where everybody knows that you're just trying to get 4 yards with every run. You're not running counter to try and hit big plays. You're not running, zone rush concepts that are designed to get big plays. Their entire offensive philosophy is, let's get 4 to 5 yards with this run. Let's keep us on the right side of the chains. Basically, we've got 4 downs to get a first down because we know 92% of the time that if we're within a yard, we're going to convert that 4th down try. So all you got to do is get 9 yards on 3 other plays. And if the math checks out and you get 4 yards every inside zone run, you should be getting first downs a lot of the times if you just run inside zone. Problem is, and I don't know how this was not brought up, but you're playing the Buffalo or the Buccaneers, who have a certain human that is a defensive tackle for the Buccaneers. His name happens to be Vita Vea. He is about 2 humans in one, and he is a one-man run game wrecking crew. And that's exactly what he did to the Eagles' run game this past weekend. He just stuffed everything. They didn't run away from Vita Vea. They didn't try and run zone read with Jalen Hurts and get him moving. They didn't, just don't run directly into Vita Vea every single time with these inside zone calls from shotgun. It's stupid. And they kept doing it over and over and over again. And then they would get into these 3rd down and longs. And instead of trying to run crossing routes where you're getting receivers to go across the face of the safety, trying to confuse the corners and safeties in space, no, instead of doing that, we're just going to run curls and slants, and we're just going to expect our receivers to beat these corners in one-on-one situations. And Devonta Smith did it, but nobody else did anything. And that's what happens when A.J. Brown is out and you're relying on Quez Watkins and other players that I can't even remember their names. You just can't. You can't do that. And it's brought into question Nick Sirianni's job security, and I think it's very possible he gets let go. You've got some coaches on the market right now that are, I think, upgrades in terms of just developing a culture, getting the most out of the rosters that they've got. Bill Belichick is out there and you're not going to give him front office stuff because obviously Howie Roseman has that. He's not giving that up. But if you can get Howie Roseman and Bill Belichick on the same page, that's a match made in heaven, because Bill Belichick's issue is never, it's never coaching on the field. It's personnel. He cannot get personnel right. So if you take away personnel, and the Eagles are in a unique situation where they can say, yeah, we've got the best GM in the league, we're not giving you personnel. And I don't think he would push back on that. He would just want to be on the same page with Howie Roseman, which I would imagine two pros like that, they can get on the same page. And if you just let Bill coach your team, you're golden. If you don't want to go the Bill Belichick route, you've got Jim Harbaugh, you got Mike Vrabel sitting out there. And it feels like it's just so obvious to me, and maybe I'm missing something. But like, Jim Harbaugh won 71% of his games as the coach of the 49ers, took them to a Super Bowl. He goes to Michigan, wins there too, wins a national championship. He's going to be a really good coach in the NFL. He's going to be a good coach no matter where you put him. You plant him, that tree will grow. Mike Vrabel had 2 straight seasons where his Tennessee Titans team, of which Ryan Tannehill was the quarterback, they had the number 1 seed in the AFC 2 years in a row. These are seasons where Patrick Mahomes is the quarterback. He is playing, and he's not getting the number 1 seed because the Tennessee Titans, with Ryan Tannehill, are getting the number 1 seed. Then when the roster declines, the GM starts making terrible decisions, a la A.J. Brown for a pumpkin and some packing peanuts to the Eagles. All of a sudden, the Tennessee Titans start losing, and that's, let's be honest, it's because their roster's terrible. Mike Vrabel gets the best out of the roster that he's been given. You pair him with Howie Roseman. We know Roseman develops good rosters. He makes good moves. The team is always good for the Eagles. You know, he develops this core, Howie Roseman does, that you can build around. And he's a wizard. He's a roster wizard. And you pair him with a good coach, a good X's and O's guy, a good culture guy, you're going to win. I don't know that Nick Sirianni is a good X's and O's guy. He's not a play caller. You could clearly see that when Shane Steichen left, they took a major step back on offense. And they took a massive step back on defense too when Jonathan Gannon left to be the head coach of the Cardinals. You need somebody who's going to come in here and get the culture right. And despite the fact that they have all these stud veterans, these Hall of Famers up and down this roster, the culture wasn't ever right. And I think you've got to look at the end of the day and you got to say, Nick Sirianni did not get it done as the coach. And you've got all these other guys out here. You know, a lot of times when you're looking at coaches, it's like, well, who are we going to get that's better? And in this case, you've got 3 guys that I think are better. And so if this Eagles job comes open and they come calling, I think Bill Belichick takes that phone call. Jim Harbaugh, Mike Vrabel, they take the phone call. And I think it's very possible you land one of those 3. And frankly, all 3 of them are upgrades for over Nick Sirianni. All right, that's all I've got for this episode. If you enjoyed it, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you can be notified every time I drop a video. Appreciate you watching, subscribing, commenting, all the things. I'll see you all in the next episode.